This is our regular Sunday night Requisite 9 transmission. Thank you very, very much to all of you who continue to support me and travel this perilous path with me. It's 7 years now since I started speaking out, and for many of you, for some of you at the very least, you've been on with me on this journey for just as long, which is why the events that have happened since my last transmission should not surprise any of you. Here is the undeniable truth. Baroness Louise Casey did not recommend excluding a judge from the national inquiry. Appointing a judge would not have delayed the inquiry, and the appointment of a judge has no bearing on any parallel criminal investigations. Despite clear documentary evidence that I released on Friday, Friday morning, not one news organisation has reported on it, not one so-called campaigner on this issue, the majority of whom have jumped on this bandwagon, have commented on it either. So you have to ask the question, why? Why is not a single broadcaster, newspaper or journalist, campaigner even, challenging a Prime Minister who lied to Parliament on a matter this grave? Why has the media remained silent as survivors are betrayed again, this time not by grooming gangs, but by the very government that promised to deliver justice, specifically the Prime Minister himself? The answer, though uncomfortable, should be obvious to all of you by now. They cannot confront this story, just as they cannot interview me on any mainstream media channel, because doing so would expose the very institutions that they ultimately serve. It would mean admitting that the system, political, bureaucratic and journalistic, has protected those who were involved in some way or another of the industrial scale gang rape of our nation's children. They need to protect the establishment, the political leaders, our bureaucratic administrators, and the journalists and media outlets. They all need to protect each other, and in doing so, they are helping hide the truth of what has taken place. They promised you. It wasn't just me now, was it? They promised you, every one of you. Since at least January, they've been promising you that the survivors of child sexual exploitation were told that justice was finally coming. The government, kicking and screaming, but we forced them into a position where they promised a national inquiry that would cut through decades of denial, deceit, and failure. Ministers stood before cameras and claimed that this time the truth would be told. Journalists lined up and repeated stories that we'd been sharing for years as though it was new news. And opposition MPs from across the land stood in Parliament and grandstanded on this issue. But when the moment came to decide who would lead the inquiry, the truth was buried all over again. You've seen it yourself. How many of them genuinely picked up on how the favourite to have led the inquiry, Jim Gamble, was a former Labour Party member and a party activist who campaigned for the expansion of the Labour Party into Northern Ireland? How many of you would have known this detail in the way we released it and used it to campaign if we had not done so? They all knew. Survivors and campaigners called for a judge to chair the process. Someone with independence, credibility and the authority to compel evidence without political interference. Instead, the government produced a short list that included a former police officer and a social worker. No judge, definitely no independence. And when questions were asked, the Prime Minister stood in Parliament and told the country that the decision had already been made by Baroness Louise Casey, the very person whose review had prompted the inquiry in the first place. He said Casey was the person who had decided against a judge-led inquiry. Sorry. He said Casey had decided against a judge-led inquiry. This was, well, some people say, he misled Parliament. I say he lied. Because he knew what the truth was. When Baroness Casey had given her evidence to the Home Affairs Select Committee, she had envisioned something different from a 7-year judge-led inquiry. Slightly different. But she was clear on what she said. She proposed a national statutory inquiry with full powers supported by local investigations, or hubs. Her emphasis was on structure and scope, not who would lead it. She never ruled out judicial leadership. She never said a judge should not be chair. She described a hybrid model, a national commission with statutory powers combined with local investigations that could deliver answers more directly to victims. Casey's proposal was about the architecture of the inquiry, not the authority. The Prime Minister turned that framework into a verdict. He claimed she had ruled out judges altogether, creating a convenient cover story for a decision that was purely political. If the government truly possesses evidence that Casey made such a recommendation, it should release it. To date, no such record exists. No minutes, no advice, no correspondence, just a line from the Prime Minister spoken in Parliament, unchallenged by a single journalist and repeated uncritically across the airwaves. And I have to ask, how difficult would it be for the Shadow Home Secretary, for Kemi Badenoch, the leader of the opposition? How difficult would it even be for Nigel Farage, even, for instance, to ask Baroness Casey a simple question? Did you rule out a judge? Did you rule out a judge? Not one of them have, not one of them appear willing to do so. There is a second claim the Prime Minister made that is equally false. Now, perhaps it's not an outright lie in the same way the reference to Baroness Casey ruling out the judges, but at the very least he misled Parliament. This one was about speed. He insisted that a judge-led inquiry would take too long. This is clearly false. 2 days before he made the statement, his own safeguarding minister Jess Phillips told Parliament that the inquiry would be time limited to 3 years. This is something that she's been making reference to for a while now. The timetable had already been set. The issue of speed was settled before the Prime Minister opened his mouth. A judge would not have slowed anything down. Removing the option of a judge does not make an inquiry faster. Judges have led inquiries for far more complex issues than this one, I would argue. They have examined decades of evidence, multiple agencies and institutional failures, all within fixed timeframes. The argument that speed was the reason to exclude a judge was also a fabrication. This was not about efficiency. This was about power, about who controls the process, who defines the questions, and who decides when the truth is enough. The final claim made by the Prime Minister concerned criminal investigations. He told Parliament he wanted an inquiry that could run in parallel with ongoing police operations, and that this was why a judge could also not be appointed. Again, completely false. The ongoing investigations he referred to, the reopening of 1,200 historic cases as part of Operation Beacon Port, a separate National Crime Agency operation, had launched months earlier. It has nothing to do with the National Inquiry structure, leadership, or timetable. By conflating the two, the Prime Minister misled Parliament and the public. He presented the reopening of cases as evidence of the inquiry's success, when in fact it lies entirely outside its remit. And his statement carries a darker implication. By suggesting that these 12,000 cases are being handled by the police, he has quietly admitted that they fall outside the inquiry's scope. That means thousands of victims will never have their experience examined as evidence of institutional failure, the very issue that inquiry was meant to expose, because they will say, oh, this was a live police investigation. The Prime Minister has lied once and at least misled Parliament twice on Wednesday. No one will speak about it. It should not surprise any of you who've been on this journey with me. No one would speak about Andy Burnham's deceit. No one would speak about Angela Rayner's role in trying to facilitate the cover-up. And most definitely no one will speak about Jim McMahon's active role in what took place in my hometown, which is where my journey on this started 7 years ago. The purpose of a national inquiry is not meant to track down offenders. It exists to examine why, how, and who in positions of authority ignored warnings, silenced victims, and protected reputations instead of children, dare I say it, looked the other way and allowed children to be systematically gang raped so as to protect their careers or progress in their political aspirations. That is the purpose of a national inquiry. It is meant to ask how those failures happened, who specifically allowed them, and how they can be stopped from ever happening again. By pretending otherwise, the Prime Minister, I'll be kind here, has blurred the lines between criminal investigation and institutional accountability. In doing so, he lied, he misled, did both the House of Commons and the country about the purpose of the very inquiry his government had created. Here is the undeniable truth once more. Let me break it down to you and repeat it, and I'll keep repeating it because this is what we had to do to get this far. Baroness Louise Casey did not recommend excluding a judge from chairing the National Inquiry. Appointing a judge would never have delayed the progress of the inquiry. And the appointment of a judge has no bearing on any parallel criminal investigations that are being currently undertaken by the National Crime Agency or any police force in this country. Each of the Prime Minister's justifications is false, and remember, he's not just a politician. He's the former Director of Public Prosecutions. He has an in-depth understanding of what I am sharing with you. And yet, despite this conclusive evidence, his statement in Parliament, despite that, cross-referenced against the evidence, including Baroness Casey's comments in the Home Affairs Select Committee, transcribed by Hansard, not me. And this cover-up now extending to Downing Street itself, the silence from our nation's media and all those who jumped on this bandwagon is deafening. Every word I've just shared with you can be independently verified. Every quote is on the public record. Every contradiction is documented in the official transcripts of parliamentary evidence. Not one broadcaster, not one newspaper, not one major journalist or even campaigner has reported it. Not one. Why? Because acknowledging this lie would expose the establishment's own complicity. Acknowledging this lie would perhaps have people blacklisted in the same way I am. Acknowledging this lie would mean there is no coming back for any of us. It would mean admitting that the rape gang cover-up did not end with local councils or police forces. It extends to the highest level of government and to the newsrooms that refuse to challenge them. This was never about speed. It was never about running investigations in parallel. It was always about control, about who writes history and who is silenced in it. The rape gang cover-up continues, and now it leads all the way to Downing Street. And I do not accept that as a reason. I do not, Karen, accept that as a reason. Scared? Scared of telling the truth? The Sunday Times, the Telegraph? Scared of telling the truth? GB News? Scared of telling the truth? No. I think if you decide that it is true that they are scared of telling the truth, then it only demonstrates further the truth of what I risk by sharing this with you. A very, very good evening to all of you who have joined me today. We are 7 years into this journey. The cover-up has been the same at every level. Every time we've exposed politicians that we thought were senior enough, the leader of the council in my town, the Greater Manchester Mayor, so on and so on, every news agency, including GB News, Talk, all of them have been complicit in covering up what took place, not reporting on the key features of what we talk about. And now it's gone all the way up to Parliament and the Prime Minister himself. They all continue to fail to report on a simple matter where the evidence is conclusive, is clear. And if I'm lying, lads, tell me. Go and ask Baroness Casey if I'm lying. Go and ask Baroness Casey if she ruled out the appointment of a judge as chair of the National Inquiry. Kemi Badenoch won't do it. None of them will. It's not about controlling me. It's about the very clear and concise manner in which I articulate the evidence and analyse what has taken place. I'm sorry, Simon Danczuk was not silenced. He's recreating a myth about himself. Simon Danczuk did not speak out at the time. If he did tell me, Simon Danczuk did not speak out at the time. He only spoke out after January. You think it's got to come out? They can't hide it forever? I hope you're right. I hope you're right. But what I learnt yesterday has concerned me deeply. For a long time, we've been releasing evidence where people don't believe us, people don't believe us, people don't believe us, and it's been easy to demonise and sideline me. January came along, and despite the mainstream media blackout of me still, I went on a whole host of podcasts. Maya Tusi, Liam Tufts, Andrew Gold, all of them, yeah. I think the only ones that didn't have me on were Trigonometry But all the other major ones got back to me at one point or another and had me on. I went to each of these places. They asked me about what we talk about and stuff. I said, listen, ask me whatever you want, but don't tell me the questions beforehand. And when you release your video, I don't want to see it until it's actually been released and everyone else is seeing it at the same time. I went to each of these interviews. No notes, no papers, nothing. And I spoke and answered truthfully, honestly and consistently my replies and my responses and my explanation of what took place to absolutely everyone. I know I'm not lying. You know I'm not lying. And you know what so many of us have gone through to get it here. And now that it's here, I thought, wow, I spent 9 months traveling the country, speaking to people, being interviewed. And now I release information on Friday morning, clearly articulated, clearly evidenced, cross-referenced. At the very least, surely the opposition will pick up on it. No. Surely GB News and the others will now pick up on it. You don't have to reference me. None of them ever have. When they've took my work, it's fine. Pick up on it. No. Not even one of the think tanks, not even one of the new groups that have come out, none of them have spoken about it. Now, Helen, I released it on Friday. They spent all today talking about some bloody MP who clumsily expressed something that I think so many of you feel. Of the misrepresentation of the demographics of the country on our TV screens in adverts. So once again, here is my challenge to every one of the big mainstream podcasting sort of names. Get in touch. A lot has happened since you interviewed me in January, February. And I will share with you and my analysis of everything that's happened right up to this moment, what the Prime Minister has lied. And not one politician or mainstream news outlet has picked up on it and lied on the most serious of matters, which is the structure of the national inquiry into the rape gangs. The only way Baroness Casey will come clean to confirm it, if someone with gravitas was to ask Baroness Casey. They're not even doing that. They won't even ask the question, Cian. Me writing to Casey will make absolutely no difference. You writing to Casey will make absolutely no difference. And this is where we are at. The only way the truth gets out, and I don't mean this with any ego whatsoever, is through the posts I share on X, Facebook, and most significantly, the more detailed analysis I provide on Redwall and the Rabble. I've been begging for months for people to sign up. I'm just over 7,000. It's pitiful. And And I'm sorry, you think it's all over and we're going to win just like that? For someone who's done the heavy lifting for the last 7 years, we're not winning here without the numbers. Thank you very much, Aid. Thank you so much for the super chat. Thank you, Ian. What's happened with all your usernames? Has something happened with YouTube? Has YouTube done something? And thank you. Natanya, thank you so much. If you're finding value, please at least like and share. Oh, of course he's a new phone. I spoke to him the other day. He was like, Gary, my friend, this is my friend Gary Tarbuck. He was like one of those old men. He's switched from Apple to Android and is clearly like pressing buttons, trying to work out what's going on. Then, mate, the ones who invite me have invited me. Some have invited me, and then when I've got in touch with them, they've not got back in touch. And you can pressure them all that you want, Aid. It's over there. They had some bloody nutcase on today from Birmingham or something. They won't have me on, Aid. They won't have me on. Let's have a look at a question, an opinion piece in the Telegraph. It's the closest I could find to what's gone on. I've done the Lotus Eaters one, but I'm afraid it wasn't the best of the podcast. They then put it up behind some sort of firewall or subscription or something, and it was a lovely conversation I had. But you've got to understand a lot of these platforms have a very, they have a specific lens that they look at the world through. And indeed, I am on a podcast tomorrow. I should mention it right now. Lo and behold, I'm on an American podcast tomorrow. Why am I on an American podcast, Roger? Well, without Elon Musk, none of this would have happened. I'm on Don Keefe's podcast tomorrow at 7 o'clock. Sonia and I are friends. You can throw names at me all day long, but they all know what's happened here. Why should I ask them why they haven't spoke out? Why should I ask anyone why they haven't spoke out? You want me to go and ask people why they haven't done the right thing? Why don't you ask them if you feel that way? I have an expectation on all of our leaders to do the right thing. And when we, in a democracy, the politicians are one arm, law and order is another, and the judiciary is another, and then you've got the media. And the media, independent media, is meant to be what holds these people to account. What I'm demonstrating to you is the independent media in this country is not independent. And people keep asking me this, and I keep telling you no. And if you can't understand why I'm saying no, then that's a reflection on you and your political understanding what's taking place here. If I'd teamed up with Tommy And I'm very clear on my position with Tommy. It's very well documented that he's been politically persecuted. If I team up with Tommy, two things happen. One, it's easier for them to ring fence me in that extreme right space, regardless of whether it is or not, it's of no consequence. And secondly, come and try living where I live. How long do you think I would last? You saw what took place in London yesterday. How long do you think I would last? And no, and I won't team up with her either, because there's a very Muslim sort of lens, or anti-Muslim or ex-Muslim lens he looks through. He's just demonstrating your ignorance. It's easy for me to be sidelined if I go and occupy those spaces. Let's bring this up. Why would Labour hide the truth about grooming gangs? Which means you would define what the truth is, wouldn't you? You would define what the truth is. And it's not a bad article. But the inverted commas, the question it asks is, why would Labour hide the truth about grooming gangs? Widening the scope of the inquiry is suspicious and means justice is being delayed again. Well, we now know that the Prime Minister and everyone else has agreed not to widen. The government's national inquiry has descended into chaos. 5 grooming gang survivors this week quit the inquiry, is victim liaison panel, citing major concerns over the direction of the inquiry and how it is being run. Fiona Goddard, a survivor of a Bradford grooming gang who has waived her anonymity and who led the group of 5, has called for Jess Phillips, the safeguarding minister in charge of the inquiry, to resign. In a resignation letter, Ms Goddard criticised the inquiry's toxic, fearful environment and condescending and controlling language used towards survivors and concerns about its lack of distance to the Labour government. But most damning was an apparent push to expand the scope of the inquiry. Ms Goddard is concerned that the inquiry would thereby be watered down and thus ignore the sensitive but crucial issue of the racially and religiously aggravated pattern of offending. Her victims panel, she revealed this week, had already been asked whether they would like to widen its scope. These are more than valid reasons throughout the history of the rape gang scandal. Well, at least he's calling it the rape gang scandal. Women like Miss Goddard have been repeatedly betrayed and failed because of official sensitivities about the offending pattern, with predominantly Pakistani Muslim gangs predominantly abusing white girls. Past inquiries have proved reluctant to investigate this key dynamic, and many survivors views widening the scope as a vehicle for rendering them toothless. The 22 ICSA, whose remit included abuse in the church and within the home, was far too broad to properly address the rape gangs. Actually, it never addressed the rape gangs. Indeed, it seemed that a deliberate decision was made to ignore towns where grooming had taken place, said Goddard this week. We are terrified that this will happen again. Quite rightly, the rapid audit completed by Baroness Casey in June, which precipitated the national inquiry, was into group-based child sexual exploitation and abuse and nothing else. She also called for a specific focus on the role of race and religion. But on Thursday, came a statement from 5 other survivors on the panel whose abuse though clearly horrifying, does not strictly fit the pattern identified by Louise Casey. Led by survivor Samantha Walker Roberts, who, if you watched what I shared, I completely destroyed her and put in place played her own words, where she made reference to the bigger picture and her desire to help hide the racial and religious demographics in this case, in case Reform and Tommy Robinson would benefit from it. That was shared in the public domain. Telegraph would have known about it. They've not even reported on it. They've not even reported on it. Samantha waived her anonymity, backed widening the inquiry, saying it should cover all types of sexual exploitation and that anyone who believes the evidence should be included should have the chance to participate. The group also threatened to resign from the panel if Ms. Phillips was herself forced to resign. I think it's very clear what the Muslim convert Samantha Walker Roberts' real agenda is, don't you? I think it's also very clear as to how she and the others found themselves on that panel, don't you? There has been the suggestion that this latest intervention from Samantha and her team shores up Miss Phillips's position, showing that she does at least have the confidence of some survivors on the panel, if not all of them. That's a complete and utter lie. That is a complete and utter lie. Just who do you think you are, Ali? That is a complete and utter lie. How dare you suggest that I was invited on by GB News and I couldn't make it? How dare you? I have no time on this journey for fucking liars. You are a liar. That is an outright lie. Arguably, though. In fact, Gary, you were with me on the train going down to London when we were going to see Andy Gold, weren't we? And we said, "Come on, then. I'll come to your offices in London." They phoned me back and cancelled me. Thank you. You articulated better than I did. The reason I've got this far, apart from my honesty, is my transparency. Yeah, that's exactly what happened. And the second time they scheduled me, they cancelled me because apparently the news story had moved on. It was no longer relevant. That's a fair question, Louise. Is Samantha an example of Stockholm Syndrome, or is this deliberate demolition job because of her associates or other possible benefits. What I do know is she's a Muslim convert. What I do know is she actually rolls with the Pakistanis. And what I do know is in our journey to this point, she worked with a number of Pakistanis in attempting to have me maliciously prosecuted by training some young women to understand what being raped was like, so they could make malicious allegations that I was the one that had raped them. Arguably, though, it has done the opposite. On Tuesday, Miss Phillips seemed to accuse Miss Goddard of having spread misinformation and false allegations that were plans to widen the scope, which is now even harder to believe now, as it is further the acrimony. The group led by Miss Walker Roberts have in one breath praised Miss Phillips for amplifying the voices of women and girls who would have otherwise been unheard, before joining her in taking aim at Miss Goddard's group next. So, actually, if it wasn't true, then why is she doing it? Yeah. They told The Guardian there should be consequences for those who allegedly breach confidentiality. Consequences. So, I challenge anyone in government to try and take legal action against Fiona Goddard, Ellie Reynolds and the others. There will be a national outcry. They told The Guardian there should be consequences for those who allegedly breach confidentiality, pointedly urged everyone involved to display respect and compassion, and insisted there should be no re-entry for those who had forfeited their position on the panel. No one wants Samantha Walker wouldn't even know what the word forfeit means. No one wants this most serious of issues to develop into an SW1 style briefing war. But the fact is, such factionalism and mistrust was always likely result of having a separate group of survivors in the process who are both apparently aligned with Miss Phillips and who don't feel their experience of abuse fits within the typical understanding of grooming gang. Of course, one can hardly blame Miss Walker Roberts' group for wanting the inquiry they have been invited onto to include their own experiences in its scope. Fair point. Instead, so the question is, who invited them onto the group? Yeah. The only thing that matters to Jess Phillips is the glory of Jess Phillips. Instead, the grim conclusion many will draw is that at best, by lack of foresight, Miss Phillips has allowed a group of survivors to be included in the inquiry whose inclusions was always likely to derail it. Convenient, some might say, for a party many of whose local councils are expected to be widely implicated by any thorough investigation. With two potential chairmen having recused themselves this week, and with the search for a new one expected to take months, that is undeniably what has now happened. Which means that on the safeguarding minister's watch, justice for these women and girls has been delayed yet again. Ms. Phillips is ultimately responsible for this failure, and she should surely now resign. So the question that they asked was, why would Labour hide the truth about the grooming gangs? What they've demonstrated in this opinion piece is how potentially they've derailed the national inquiry. And the closest I've got to why is because of the ethnicity of the offenders and the ethnicity of the victims. That's what we all thought. It doesn't answer the questions, does it? Because the truth is, they are complicit. In my town, we have clearly demonstrated the role Jim McMahon, now MP, former Minister for Local Government. We have clearly evidenced the role he played in aiding and abetting the ongoing abuse of these children through his actions of suppressing the truth and the news from coming out so that parents of girls, their daughters, they could protect their daughters. And not only did he and his council suppress the truth, they celebrated suppressing the truth. And throughout this period, girls were being dragged into shisha bars, gang raped, drugged, gang raped and trafficked. We then proved how the Greater Manchester Mayor, Andy Burnham, covered up what took place through his sham assurance review. And in the same way as we're having this conversation now, no one would report on it. And that is because of the media spin that protects and surrounds him, and it is now the same with the Prime Minister. So you've got the politicians involved in what actually took place on the ground. You've got those like Andy Burnham who attempted to cover up what took place. And now you've got the likes of Jess Phillips and even the Prime Minister who are involved in attempting to cover up the cover-up of what took place. This is taking place on at least 3 different tiers. And whilst that may be the case, that she won't be voted in next time, that does not make it right what she's been allowed to do now. I'm afraid my viewing numbers are in the low thousands, I think consistently at best. I'm not sure. I'm not sure where we're going with this. It's up to you all to try and share this story, because what I'm sharing with you now is no one else has, and we've only got this far because of ordinary people like you refusing to give up. Thank you. And the question for me remains, on Wednesday at Prime Minister's Questions, the Prime Minister of our nation directly incriminated himself in the cover-up of the industrial scale gang rape of our nation's children. And no one has reported on it. But the Americans will know tomorrow. The Americans will know tomorrow because I'm being interviewed live, I think, at 7 o'clock. Don Keefe, I'm sure if you follow him, you'll know his channel and stuff and where he puts his content out. I don't have the link, I'm afraid, Karen. But once I get the link, I'll put it up. Of course I will. Okay. Short break for 5 minutes. And I want to go through some of the letters, the to and fro, including a letter from the Prime Minister. Unprecedented. And I want to share with you what's gone on there. Okay, so maybe a 5-minute break. I'm thinking, is it too late for chocolate? Maybe a biscuit? But I definitely need a hot drink. I'll go and get a hot drink, and you perhaps do what you're doing, and I'll see you in a few minutes. I've got mint tea, Helen. I do have Ovaltine. Every now and then I'll have a cup of Ovaltine as I fall asleep. Yeah, I mean, Mate, I can't even get on some of the. I can't even get on a news channel in my country. Never mind Joe Rogan. Okay. So there's this law firm called Switalskis. They're based in Yorkshire, I think. Sheffield way, I think. And they've written this letter on behalf of Fiona Goddard to Jess Phillips. And it's written by a man called David Greenwood. So I want to show you something. I spoke at this panel discussion. Hold this up. And it was the Agora Debating Club in London on the 1st of October 2025. If you recall, I travelled down and I caught the overnight coach back so I could get home to make sure I took my daughter into school in the morning. And on the panel was, so there's no ambiguity, David Greenwood. So that's what it looks like. You can see David Greenwood. And the other lady here, Donna Anna Lutfi, I will speak on her podcast at some point. She's setting up a podcast. She's brilliant, by the way. And Louise was there. Louise travelled down. And some of you who listen in here were also there. Turn the light back on. And what took place on that panel was basically it was split into two sides. Those who were aligned with me and those who wanted the ICSA stuff to be put in place first and were hesitant of this as racially motivated, religiously justified. David Greenwood spoke. He's the head of Child Abuse Compensation Team. And when he spoke, initially, his position was very much reserved as to where we currently were. And I think he was anxious of the racism stuff and all of that. They recorded, the Agora Debating Club recorded it, and it's on their webpage somewhere, so you'll find it. It lasted about an hour and a half, 2 hours. And by the end of it, we had everyone agreeing with how this actually needed to look like. So as I've maintained from the outset, we take every one of us with us. As many people as possible. We're here for the right reasons. And David's viewpoint had changed. His viewpoint had changed to one more aligned with what I've been saying. And he was confident that we are in this space for the right reasons. On the panel was also a lady called Lucy Duckworth. She'd given up 8 years of her life working on ICSA and served as its victims and survivors consultative panel member. There was a ding-dong between her and Baroness Cox. And again, through the position I took, they both ended up in the same place. This is a national scandal. It is a shame. It is a stain on our nation and a shame for every one of us involved in safeguarding children, and we have a duty to put it right for all of us. And now we've got David writing these letters. Brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. And yeah, that's it. You could see the truth. Absolutely brilliant. And this letter is amazing. I made reference to what Fiona and her friends, what that team had done. And they've outmaneuvered Jess Phillips and the Labour Party. And what this letter is, because Fiona is very clear. I think there's no doubt whatsoever that Jess Phillips is calling her a liar in Parliament and also to the Home Affairs Committee. And this law firm is now basically saying the suggestion, it has been reported that the government is seeking to dilute the focus of the inquiry, either by instructing it to take a regional approach to investigations or by expanding the scope beyond grooming gangs. This is also untrue. So that's the quote from Jess Phillips. The suggestion of widening the scope was patently not untrue because Fiona released the information. The emails, even the text messages with Jess Phillips. So Jess Phillips knew Ms. Goddard had queried the issue in September. The words set out in this quotation from Ms. Phillips's letters are defamatory of Ms. Goddard, as they tend to lower her in the estimation of right-thinking members of society. Of course, when the safeguarding minister for girls is accusing one of the survivors of being a liar, a government minister making that allegation, of course, that young woman's, the way in which it's considered, her estimation will have suffered from right-thinking members of society. Specifically, they suggest Miss Goddard has been untruthful. They don't suggest, they go stronger than that, David, but I'm with you. The words can only have meant to refer to Miss Goddard due to their content and timing, 100%. The words were clearly published widely. The words used have caused harm. She believes many members of the public believe she is untruthful. Miss Goddard will accept a written apology from Ms. Phillips to put an end to this matter. Ms. Goddard believes that it will help restore her reputation. This letter went out on the 23rd of October. Jess Phillips is now, her career's over. There's only two things she can do. They tried I suppose it was from someone, I don't suppose it was Samantha Walker's idea to do what she did. I'm sure that idea came from somewhere else. And it's failed in its attempt to deflect it. It's actually made it worse, which, as the Telegraph opinion piece showed. Jess Phillips will now have to write to Fiona with a written apology. I'm no doubt Fiona will share that written apology. And that will be the end of Jess Phillips. Because it will prove that she lied. Not to, but about a grooming gang survivor, a rape gang survivor. If Jess Phillips does not write an apology, David Greenwood and his team will sue Jess Phillips for libel. and they will sue her for libel, and they'll win. And Jess Phillips's career is over. Either way, Jess Phillips is finished because of a sequence of events where Fiona did not come out and accuse Jess Phillips of anything. Fiona came out and said she's resigning from the panel, the the survivors panel, and set out her reasons why. They included, one, her experience of the panel, in terms of all the forms they had to sign, the secretive stuff. They tried to control the survivors and restrict who they could speak to. 2, regarding the shortlisting of a police officer and social worker, the very professions that represented, that the failings had been embedded in. And the third one was the widening of the scope. Jess Phillips then responded to the Home Affairs Select Committee. The Guardian published the parts of her letter, remember? So it was in a national newspaper. And she reiterated it in Parliament in response to the urgent question. On Tuesday, I think it was, the urgent question. And said there was no expanding of the scope. That's the quote here. It has been reported that the government is seeking to dilute the focus of the inquiry, either by instructing it to take a regional approach to investigations or by expanding the scope beyond grooming gangs. This is also untrue. Well, that's been proven false by not just Fiona Goddard subsequently then releasing the correspondence, including private text messages with Phillips. That exposes Phillips knew, so it's not untrue. And also then by Samantha Walker coming out and saying what she did, because that demonstrates that there are people on that panel who want it widened and were put on that panel despite them not being survivors of the grooming gangs. So Fiona kept that information. Jess Phillips opened her mouth and lied, and then Fiona exposed the lie. Jess Phillips and her team thought, oh, here we go, Samantha Walker perhaps, or whoever, let's deflect this. Let's talk about the need for unity. Fiona wasn't having any of it, as instructed lawyers. And she's now finished. She can't ignore it, mate, because ignoring it means that the libel proceedings will start. A rape gang survivor has just outmaneuvered the entire machinery of the state. Bravo. Absolutely well played, young woman. This was then followed up today, I think, by survivors who remained on the panel. So if you want to split the group into 3, there are survivors who left. There's Samantha Walker and the Muslim convert, rolls with Pakistani gangsters, Samantha Walker, on record for saying that there's a bigger picture here. And that bigger picture is to hide the demographics in case Reform or Tommy Robinson use it. And I'm paraphrasing, but they're more or less her words. So that's the second group, and this appears to be the third group. We are survivors of grooming gangs and members of the Grooming Gang Inquiry Panel. We came into this work because we wanted to help create real change, to make sure no child ever has to go through what so many of us have endured. But right now, things are incredibly hard. Some of our fellow survivors Brave, strong and honest people are being harassed and targeted simply for sharing their opinions. It's heartbreaking to watch survivors who have already lived through the worst kind of trauma now being attacked for using their voices. It takes immense courage to speak out, and no survivors should ever be punished for doing so. This kind of harassment is not fair and it's not right. We want to say clearly that we stand with Fiona Goddard, Elizabeth Harper and all the survivors who have chosen to step away from the panel. Well, they've omitted Ellie Reynolds' name because Ellie Reynolds, it gave her real name, which isn't Elizabeth Harper, by the way, but that's by the by. I think it's significant for you to understand there are factions and factions within this, and the omission of Ellie's name would not have been accidental. We want to say clearly that we stand with Fiona Goddard, Elizabeth Harper and all the survivors who have chosen to step away from the panel. Both have been a powerful voice in this work, strong, compassionate and fearless in their pursuit of truth and justice. Their voice matters deeply. We completely respect and support their decision and the decision of others to put their well-being first. No one should ever be made to feel unsafe or unheard for standing for the truth. I don't agree with this, but I'll talk about this another day. Survivors need to be the ones leading this work. We have lived it, we understand the systems that failed us, and we know what must change to protect others. This inquiry should not be about politics or power. It should be about truth, justice, and the voices of those who were silenced for too long. I'm afraid all you demonstrate there is your naivety, inexperience, that you believe that we can get to where you want to get to without politics. But that's by the by, it's a conversation for another day. To every survivor reading this, you are not alone, your voice matters. And it's signed by Emily Vaughan, Joanne Phillips, Gaia Cooper, Carly Halliwell, Jamie Lee and Lucy Jones. So that's another 6. So 5 have left, 6 support Fiona and her position. And then on Saturday, yesterday, the Prime Minister sent this. You can see there, 10 Downing Street, the Prime Minister, 24th of October. So maybe he's wrote it on Friday, but the survivors got it on Saturday. Dear Fiona, Elizabeth, Jessica and Eliane, I wanted to reach out directly to thank you for being part of the expert panel and supporting us to set up the national inquiry into grooming gangs. The heinous crimes committed against you and many others by violent and depraved gangs were truly appalling. We know that in some areas these crimes were disproportionately committed by Asian men, and I assure you that the inquiry will look explicitly at that. You were also let down catastrophically by the institutions that should have protected you, and they must be held accountable. We are determined that survivors must be at the heart of this inquiry, and we do not underestimate the bravery you have shown by reliving these ordeals. I wanted to offer my personal commitment to you in getting this inquiry right. I understand your decision to leave the panel will not have been taken lightly, but the door will always be open should you wish to return. All best wishes, Keir Starmer. So I was going to do what I do and dissect this letter. I have no need to dissect the letter. Ellie Reynolds has responded to the Prime Minister in a way that does everything I could do and much more. I'll read it to you. Dear Prime Minister, if your reasons for writing to me was to make me feel better, it did the complete opposite. In your letter, you thank me for being on the expert panel and for supporting the national inquiry into grooming gangs. But you don't thank me for telling the truth. The truth that exposed how your government used, manipulated, and abused me and others in this process. That's exactly why you're writing to me now. You say there were heinous crimes committed by Asian men. You know that's not right. Years of court cases and witness statements have shown the overrepresentation of Pakistani men in these rape gangs. Even Baroness Casey has spoken clearly of Pakistani men. Yet here you are still hiding behind the word Asian. Why can't you say it? How can anyone believe a word you say when you won't even say those two words? You wrote that we were let down badly by institutions. But institutions didn't fail us, Prime Minister. People did. Police officers ignored us. Social workers dismissed us. Councillors and MPs looked the other way while we were being abused. And when the truth began to emerge, politicians hid it for fear of maintaining community relations. Even you, knowing the truth, described investigating what happened to us as a far-right bandwagon. Why did you do that, Prime Minister? To use the fear of being called racist as a weapon to suppress the truth. You end your letter by saying the door will always be open should you wish to return. Return to what, Prime Minister? To a process that lied about us? To a panel stacked with people recruited to hide the truth? Work with people exposed for wanting to hide the racial motivation of our abusers? To a system that tried to present a former police officer or social worker, the very professions that failed us, as independent leaders of an inquiry? If we hadn't spoken out, if we hadn't resigned, what would have happened? One of those people would have been put in charge of investigating institutions responsible for our abuse. That was your government's idea of independence. And what happened when we told the truth? Your safeguarding minister accused us of lying. You promise you'll get this inquiry right, but you won't admit how catastrophically you've already got it wrong. Your own safeguarding minister, Jess Phillips, was caught lying about us, and you still say nothing. You won't sack her. You won't make her apologise. Worst of all, you won't even mention it, as if she's never said what she said. That silence says more than any promise you make. And you lied. Thank you, Ellie. You said a judge was stopped from leading the inquiry because Baroness Casey recommended it. She never said that, did she, Prime Minister? The truth is your government tried to fix the process, got caught, and now you're trying to rewrite what happened through polite letters. You wrote to look caring and in control. Instead, you exposed yourself even further. You refuse responsibility, refuse to apologize, and still refuse to admit the truth. Instead of thanking me, Prime Minister, you should have apologized to the survivors, to their families, and to everyone betrayed by those who were supposed to protect them. Until that happens, your inquiry will remain what it has always been, a continuation of the cover-up. You said the door will always be open for me to return. Well, the door is open for you to tell the truth, to admit the cover-up, and apologize to every child failed by your deceit, your lies, and your cowardice. Yours sincerely, Ellie Reynolds. I think that's exactly what it is. They thought these young ladies would not stand up. So here we are. Here we are. Once these young women were described as victims, and many of them decided, no, we're not victims, we're survivors. They changed the language. For some of them now, the term survivor actually does them an injustice. They are at the forefront of this campaign. They're not campaigners. That's not enough. They are leaders. And we should do our best to amplify each and every one of their voices. Thank you to all of you who've been with me this evening. I want to do this because I remind myself I need to do this. To the 4 people who've super chatted, Aid, thank you so much. Rain, thank you so much. Tanya, thank you so much. And Zappa Salts 49. Oh, thank you, Zappa. Thank you so much. And for those of you who always ask, did we get any subscribers or anything like that? I checked my email. Five. So thank you to the 5 people who've subscribed and signed up to Redwall and the Rabble. A couple of you on the paid payment, majority of you on the free. It's fine. We just need numbers. Because without the numbers, as you can now see, they control Parliament, they control the media, and many of the campaigners who've joined this bandwagon do not want to fight against the Prime Minister or take the fight there, because they then know that there won't be pennies for them, for the think tanks and whatnot afterwards. I'm not here for a job in a think tank. I'm not here to be a politician or anything like that. I'm here because of an elderly man called Warren Bates, who handed over a dossier of files in an Aldi bag that exposed how in my hometown my children were being dragged off the streets in broad daylight into shisha bars, where they're being ganged and raped by predominantly Pakistani men. And these Pakistani men were protected because of the block vote they supplied to Jim McMahon and the Labour Party. And as we've now found out, what happened in my hometown has happened in towns and cities across the country. And we owe it to each and every one of them to continue fighting until we cannot fight anymore. We know the odds are stacked against us. But what kind of society, what kind of man would I be? What kind of person would any of you be if we looked the other way whilst children were screaming? Good night.
Do not fear them. Do not fear any of them. Do not fear them. Do not fear any of them.